Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're taking one final, and I mean final, look at the GTX 750 Ti. What a great graphics card this was. At $149 back in 2014, this was a solid choice for those on a tighter budget. Not to mention it could be slapped inside a pre-built machine, perhaps even ones with questionable power supplies, and transform them into gaming systems. Unfortunately, the Zotac OC model I have does require a 6-pin connector, which does take away from the whole plug and play aspect a little bit, but it provides a little extra headroom in case we want to overclock this already overclocked card. This will max out at just over 1228 MHz by default, and I was able to push it to just over 1400, as you can see from this Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay, but it didn't make much of a difference because the VRAM is probably this thing's biggest limitation. We've got just 2 gigs. This overclock would prove disastrous anyway. After about 5 minutes of playing, my whole system jammed up like a jam-filled donut. The game crashed, my system crashed, and I had to switch it off at the wall and reset the BIOS to get any response at all. From then, I left everything at stock. At the time of this video, the 750 Ti still supports the latest Nvidia Game Ready driver. In fact, as I'm talking to you now, the new 576.80 driver just came out. It's currently the 17th of June 2025 for reference. Sure enough, this driver still supports the 750 Ti. It's quite funny because the driver notes state added support for games as well as fixes for games that this card probably can't even run because of the lack of full DX12 support. That's another big pitfall. You'll often see a screen like this, or like this. As a side note, I didn't realise Apex Legends dropped DX11 support. Another nail in this poor card's coffin. Still, I paid 25 quid for this old chap, so let's give him one final, set in stone and definitive final send-off. Here are a handful of games that this card can run. Well, I use the term loosely. It can start them and sort of play them. We're going to start with Call of Duty Warzone here. This is probably the biggest sacrifice I had to make in terms of the visuals. We're actually running at a native 720p here with the lowest settings. This actually meant that we saw a higher frame rate than if we were to enable FSR 1 or 3 or Nvidia image scaling at 1080p. The best way to play was certainly native 720p here. I was able to wipe out an enemy player here. I don't know how, because this certainly does not feel smooth to play. It's juddering all over the place. There are also a lot of flickering textures elsewhere, like on the ground and in the sky, and the whole thing looks really sort of oddly smooth. But let's move on. Now, another first-person shooter, and one that perhaps will be a lot more enjoyable on the 750 Ti, is Counter-Strike 2. Here we're using 1080p resolution, albeit with the lowest settings, but we're getting over 100 frames per second on average here, and it actually felt playable because of the consistency of the game as well. I know we only have 2 gigs of VRAM here, but the whole thing feels rather smooth. So if you want to buy one of these for playing CS2, you don't have too much to spend, then by all means it should be good, at least at the time of this video. Yeah, not too much to complain about in CS2 with the 750 Ti here. It's actually a really satisfying result. Now, believe it or not, well, hopefully you do believe it because you saw the gameplay footage at the start, but Cyberpunk 2077 also runs on this card. Now, this is the overclocked footage, of course. It did crash, unfortunately, but performance wasn't really any different with stock speeds. I'm using FSR 3 set to performance mode, which actually did run a bit better than lowering the resolution to 720p, and then using 720p with performance mode was just a bit ridiculous in terms of, you know, the blur and the pixelation. So I stuck with 1080p, enabled lowest settings, and then went with FSR 3 performance mode for an average of plus 30 frames per second. The percentile lows do leave a bit to be desired. I mean, there's a lot of stuttering and frame dips all over the place, but who would have thought this would actually run in the first place? Not bad at all. Fortnite will also run, and just like CS2, you're going to see over 100 frames per second. That said, the percentile lows were a little more rough here. I was actually using the performance mode. Now you can choose from DX12, DX11 and then the performance API, and I think performance mode is certainly the best choice here. That said, I did enable the epic view distance and textures as well as high meshes, so we're sort of using performance mode but maxed out, if that makes any sense, and we're also using 100% resolution scaling as well. Sure, the game doesn't look as nice as it does with DX12 mode and the settings cranked up, but I'm happy to forego that in favour of actual playability here, and it certainly is playable. Not too much to complain about with Fortnite and the 750 Ti from 2014. Now for GTA 5, we are once again using 1080p resolution. This is the legacy version of the game, or the original version of the game, as most of you probably know it as. So we're using the highest settings here with the slider set to max as well, and FXAA. MSAA was off because that's a real frame rate hog, and I'd rather have a few jagged edges as opposed to a lackluster frame rate here. But I started off with the normal settings, or basically everything set to its respective lowest, and we saw over 100 FPS just like we did in Fortnite just now. But as you can see, we can push things a bit, make the game look a bit better, and still retain over 60 frames per second as well. We actually have another GTA game next. This is Vice City Definitive Edition. For some reason I've been really getting into this again lately. I have the OG PS2 version on the PS5 as well, bought it from the store a while ago, but I've sort of been playing both of them. I still prefer the original, to be honest. That goes for all three in the trilogy, GTA 3, San Andreas and Vice City. But I do appreciate the visuals of this version. I think it looks pretty good. With the low preset and TAA+, we're seeing 60 frames per second, but you will notice a few dips and drops, which is something I've seen quite often with a wide range of hardware. So I almost expect it at this point, but it runs better than I was expecting on the 750 Ti, to be honest. Up next we have another older title. This is Left 4 Dead 2, 1080p with the highest settings, apart from MSAA, which was set to 2x rather than 8x for 190 FPS. So we certainly could have pushed the MSAA up higher, but I didn't really feel the need to here. We've also got some pretty respectable percentile lows, 118 and 97, so no issues to report from this one, which is what I was expecting going into it. But I wanted to throw this in here because it's still a really fun game, still really popular too. And if you're buying a cheap card like this and you want to play games like Left 4 Dead, CS2, Fortnite, GTA, just know that you can, and you don't have to spend much money to get an enjoyable experience, that's for sure. The same can be said for Minecraft as well. This is the Java edition with the default fabulous settings. So I said it's fabulous mode and I didn't change anything else. We're seeing 171 frames per second here. A few little stutters here and there, but it actually looked worse on paper than it felt to play, if that makes sense. 171 overall, a 1% low of 27 and a 0.1% low of 12. So it looks pretty good and it runs nicely as well. All the while the card is retaining pretty decent temperatures and consuming very little power. Next up we have Red Dead Redemption 2 at the lowest settings with 75% res scale. Now I decided to do this instead of enabling FSR because it doesn't seem to make that much of a difference performance wise in this game from what I've tested. So the best bet was 1080p, drop the resolution scaling a bit. We couldn't actually choose 1080p by default, so I had to go into the game's INI file from within my documents and manually change the resolution before changing the file to read only so that it wouldn't revert to 720p, because we can't override the settings in the menu if we're exceeding our VRAM buffer. But with the lowest settings, 38 frames per second wasn't too bad, to be honest. We could perhaps try and push the texture quality a bit higher, but it's going to cause a few more problems, especially in and around Valentine. You're going to see a few more stutters. As you can see, we're basically maxing out our VRAM anyway, like we have been doing in pretty much all of today's tested titles. Let's finalise then with The Witcher 3. The new version, I didn't bother with that, I just stuck with the original version of the game, so the DX11 version, 900p here with the lowest settings and FXAA. Now we do have the ability to select upscaling options in, of course, the next gen version, but I felt as though we'd be sacrificing resolution and visuals too much, so why just not stick with the original and hit a native 900p with the lowest settings, FXAA as well, for a half decent frame rate, and the game doesn't look all that bad. Anyway, that's the 750 Ti. It's over a decade old now, and I wanted to give it one last send-off because, yeah, we won't be looking at this card anymore unless something significant happens. When driver support finally does die off for this thing, we might look at it one last time, sort of show reel for the card, look back at its best bits, if you will, but until then, well, the 750 Ti will not be going inside one of my systems ever again. Maybe that's a bit overdramatic. There's a 4GB version as well. Not sure how much better that would do, considering the card is still quite weak these days in general. So maybe you might see a 4GB version appear at some point, but as for the 2GB card unless it's for the sake of comparison, yeah, I am done with it now. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to and you haven't done so already. Let me know your thoughts on this card. Let me know if you've ever owned one, as I'm sure a few of you have. Thanks again, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.